Good morning. Thank you, Janie. And can I add my thanks? It's wonderful to have a full room, and for the whole day, no less. So thank you. You're all very, very welcome. And welcome to our third generosity report. You should hopefully all have them on the tables. I think, yes, everyone's already reading it. I'll just sit back down, shall I? That's all good. We'll just enter into 20 minutes of silence. You guys read it, and then we'll invite the panel up. So, good. Right. If you're new to report, let's just do a bit of orientation. We first of all, we think this is the largest and most comprehensive study into Christian giving in the UK, now in its third year. And also, just as I start, we'd love to give a special thanks to both Andrew and Joe from Whitestone Insight, who have helped with this report. So thank you guys for that. The results of this year's report come from a detailed survey of 6,004 self-identifying UK Christian adults, with the data weighted to be representative of religious identification data taken from the 2021 census in England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And as with previous years, you'll find that many of the insights that we have included are segmented by what we call the respondents' depth of Christian practice. This is not something they selected for themselves. This is a segmentation we applied as we were reviewing the results. And that's based on a combination of what they told us about their church attendance and also their personal Bible reading behaviours. So just to recap, these four segments were the cultural Christians. These are those who identified as Christian when asked, but when probed, they had little to no discernible evidence of any other faith being practiced. And there's about 54.5% of that category. Then we have our church-going Christians. These are those who said they attend church at least once a month, but read their Bible less than monthly, 14.8% of the sample. Then we have our practicing Christians. These are those who also are in some type of monthly rhythm of church attendance, but also say they read their Bible at least once a month, so they're starting to show signs of a personal practice of faith. 8.1% of those polled were in that category. And then finally, we have those we call our committed Christians. These are those who attend church and read their Bibles at least weekly. So the rhythm changes significantly, and most are in that weekly rhythm. And there are 22.6% in that category. And this year, as part of the process of our research, we returned to in-person interviews, and we chose 15 participants specifically from the committed Christian segment, so that we could explore a number of the emerging themes, which I'll share in a minute. So, shall we have a look at some of the headlines? Yes, that's fine. No, it's not. So it's not a pantomime. It's fine. Sorry, cut that from the recording. Okay, right. Let's take a look. First of all, the big picture. How much are Christians giving at the moment? So first of all, let's take a step back. We'll look at the average monthly giving for all Christians in our study on the left-hand side there. So that's all of these segments combined, and we do see a slight contraction since last year's findings to £116 per month. When asked and relating that to income, that relates to around 4.7% of monthly income being given by Christians. And this giving, when we break that down, is giving directed primarily to Christian over secular charities, £91 of the £116 going to explicitly Christian causes. So that may pose the question, should we be concerned if there is a slight dip this year? And we think, as we were reviewing the results, that context is probably most helpful here. We're encouraged that the number has actually stayed relatively stable, and it's only a modest drop. If we compare, for example, some other reports, such as the Charities Aid Foundation, we'll see again the average amount given by UK citizens is £72 a month. So Christians as a whole are giving £44 more than the national average still. And if we focus on our committed Christian segment, which we know from the previous 2 years of our research to be the most generous group, the picture becomes even more encouraging. This segment now gives an average of £326 a month, a slight increase over last year, and over 10% of their income. That's £254, or 4.5 times more than the average UK citizen. And again, much of this giving maintains a Christian distinctiveness, with an average of £262 of that total giving going to Christian causes and secular charities. So let's take a look at this in comparison to last year, just to go into a bit more detail on the next slide. We've seen this slight drop from last year's report, which was £124 a month, £116 a month this year, and the proportion also decreasing from 5.3% to 4.7%. However, given the backdrop of continuing economic uncertainty, the rising cost of living, we do think it's reassuring to see regular giving holding more or less steady, and also to see committed Christians giving more. That said, the numbers do point to a slight shift as well in Christian generosity this year, and the full report explores this in more detail, and that is that fewer Christians are giving compared to last year's report. For example, 55% versus 60% last year are giving to their church. 54% versus 59% are giving to Christian charities in this year's report. Interestingly, again, we see this mirrored in some of the other national reports, including CAF's giving report, which recorded the lowest ever proportion of people giving to charity at just 50%. So Christians are still above the average. This slight drop in average monthly giving also means that the giving gap, this is the term that we refer to describe what we believe is the potential for Christians to be giving in the UK. We'll do quick maths on this one. A simple tithing principle of 10%. We're not going to argue around gross, net, or any of that right now, but let's just say 10% applied to average UK income. We get to a figure of £245 a month, and that's how we determine this giving gap, or giving potential if we're feeling more glass half full. And you'll see that that's increased by £17 from £112 to £129 since last year's report. Also new for this year is we've taken a slightly deeper dive into the motivations behind Christian giving. In previous reports, we identified that gratitude, empathy, responsibility, and trust were key motivating factors in Christians' decisions to give. We see regularly in responses that the starting place for almost all generosity is gratitude for blessings such as family, friends, and comfort, consistent across all segments. For committed Christians, this goes deeper. The gratitude goes on to talk about being firmly rooted in an understanding of what God has achieved for them through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as you'll see in this diagram, this gratitude for God's generosity in turn leads to a sense of responsibility to respond by being generous towards others, seeking to steward well what has been given to them out of love and obedience. And this year we found in the report gratitude, responsibility, and trust remain critical factors. But we also explored other features of Christian giving. And we identified three lenses through which we found Christians typically view their generosity and think about who, what, where, and why to give. And these were, first of all, theology. So this was more of an intrinsic motivation shaped by Scripture and an experience of faith, often leaning into Scripture as well to answer those questions of how should I give. The second area is relationship, more of an external motivator, motivated by one's place within a community, the responsibility that comes from that, and the experience of human connection in giving. And the third was impact, motivated by facts and information, seeking both tangible evidence of need and also the likely difference that giving will make. To help illustrate these, you'll see in the report this year we've also developed them into 5 personas, giving us a variety of lenses through which to consider the findings and make recommendations at the end of the report. 3 of these personas are based on those 3 lenses: impact, relationship, and theology. We then added 2 more based on age and stage, the young and the old, as these phases of life clearly threw up distinct differences, challenges, and opportunities which we felt were worth exploring separately. And of course, within both demographic categories, we also find evidence of all of the other motivation-driven personas. You are never one of the personas. It's also crucial to point out that for all Christians, they may exhibit a preference towards one of the lenses, but we almost never act independently of one another. And you'll find a whole section of the report where we unpack all of this and we give you a lot more about each of these personas. So just to dig in and give you a few highlights across the report of the key findings, these are the most notable findings from this year versus last year. And you'll see we've broken this down again into 3 categories. Number 1, trust. You've heard already this morning, this is a key theme of our work this year. We wanted to probe that more deeply, both in the main survey questions and also in the interviews that we conducted. And this gave us further confirmation of the vital role in particular that church teaching on generosity has on fostering that trust. And we'll come to that in a minute. We also then have a few findings on giving habits. So building on the last 2 years, we've dug more specifically into some behavioral points. And we draw out 2 which we felt were of particular note given the economic and cultural backdrop for the year ahead. And then finally, following what I like to describe as our Marmite finding from last year around young Christians giving the most, and special thanks to the Bible Society for the Quiet Revival, which gave us a real strong reassurance that our research was pretty solid last year. But we've taken another look into some aspects of the future of giving, particularly some more on younger givers. So now let's just take a quick look into some of the findings. Number 1, trust in local church leads to greater generosity. So in the research this year, we saw a very clear correlation between Christians' trust, specifically in the way their church spends donations, and the propensity they have to be generous. But not just to the church, generous to all cause areas. Those who trust their church a lot make up 74% of givers to all causes, and 75% of those giving to Christian causes. And when we look specifically at giving to church, it's very clear trust is critical. Nearly 9 out of 10, 90% of this group who say they trust their church a lot, give to that church. And 61%, 2/3 almost, are giving to their church regularly. And there's also an interesting overlap. This high trust group also significantly overlaps with the committed Christians category as well. So there's something around that deepening of faith in there too. So trust in local church leads to greater generosity, and with that trust comes responsibility. And that's probably best illustrated from one of the quotes that we have here. And this is an important quote, I think, because it really demonstrates the responsibility of trust, not just that trust is present. And I'm sure that you'll have your own thoughts on this. If my church allows somebody to speak from the front because I trust my church, I automatically trust whoever they put in front of us. So if trust is the linchpin for generosity, how do we build it? The data is clear again that the answer is regular teaching on generosity, not just once in a blue moon, but built naturally into the teaching program of their churches. 77% of those who trust their church a lot have also heard teaching on generosity in the last year. The positive correlation between those who have heard the teaching and those who trust a lot is also true for other cause areas as well. 76% of those who trust Christian charities have also heard teaching in the last year. 81% of those who trust Christian workers, individuals doing Christian ministry, are the same. And 72% even of those who trust secular causes have heard teaching. And when we then move on to the third of the findings in this trust group, we also see very clearly, again, trust leads to gratitude and joy in giving, emotions which also naturally serve as powerful drivers for increased generosity. For those who trust their church a lot, 34% report feelings of gratitude, 32% of joy for the second year running. These were our highest selected emotions and consistent with last year's report. Moreover, we see in the data that any frequency of regular Bible reading positively impacts those emotions as well. So when we look at other segments, for example, the church-going and the practicing Christians who attend church at least monthly, it's actually those who also are reading their Bibles who experience the biggest spike in joy and gratitude, jumping to 27% for joy compared to 19% of the church-going segment. 28% for gratitude, jumping up from 22% for those church-going. Again, another quote from Maya sums it up beautifully in her interview about how trust, effective teaching, and positive emotions combine again. Towards the end there, you'll see she says, "It's a joy but it also feels like a responsibility. It's not something that I take lightly. Okay, on to giving habits. So the next two findings focus on two key shifts in giving habits that we felt were particularly poignant, as I said, to the current climate. The first is focused on giving in response to a prompt, like a urgent appeal, some type of street fundraising event. And this is where we see a decline of 11% from 46% to 35% of Christians making these kinds of gifts to Christian charities. In fact, interestingly, further still, is that the proportion of Christians making one-off gifts only drops from 53% to 50%, leading us to think that the drop in response to appeals specifically suggests that those who give one-off gifts are increasingly giving on their own terms, choosing when and where to give, rather than responding to external prompts to give. In addition, when asked how often in the last 2 years Christians recall being asked to give or increase their giving, the results are down slightly this year compared to last. We also think there could be caution driven by financial pressures, leading to a preference for budgeted regular giving over unplanned one-off gifts. And then finding number 5, over 25% of Christians polled give from their savings. This was the other interesting trend that came to light as a result of a new question that we asked around how do you finance your giving? And over 25% said from savings. Interestingly, though, 14% said savings were their only source of giving. This went up to 22% for the over 65s category, perhaps not surprising, but still fascinating to see 25% of Christians giving from savings. We're sure a variety of reasons for that. The interviews brought out some, one of which we thought was particularly worth sharing here. This was Matt commenting and saying there was a significant church building project, and we kind of knew that it was extra on top of our regular giving. The church still needed all the funds that they were going to have, and so we reached into savings rather than just regular income. And now let's take a quick look at the future of giving. So how are Christians feeling about some giving decisions in the coming year? And we'll also talk about a couple of other trends that we think are worth noting. So first of all, 3 categories stood out. Now, interestingly, we've been looking often through this lens of these 4 Christian practice segments because there's very little demographic difference sometimes. But here we notice some obvious differences based on demographic. And that is that those in the wealthy category, those in the young category, and also those in the ethnic minority categories expect to give more this year, not hold or reduce their giving. So as you can see, most anticipate no change in giving, with only 16% overall expecting to give more. But when we take a closer look, these are the 3 categories that stand out. 36% of Christians earning more than £60,000 per year said that they plan to increase in the coming 12 months. The gap in ethnicity is also striking. Only 12% of white Christians plan to increase their giving, while an incredible 45%, almost half of Christians of other ethnicities, are anticipating increasing their giving in 2026. And then we'll take a brief moment to talk about those younger givers again. A slightly broader group, if we look at 18 to 34s this time, who already still remain in that highest proportion of giving their income at 9%, 40% of those expected to give more in the next 12 months. In sharp contrast to the 55 to 64 age group, where only 5% expected to do so. And again, Irene, who was interviewed, summed up one particular attitude with regards to that change. As and when my salary changes, then I'll adjust my giving. I challenge myself to increase my giving over time. We also learned in the research that younger givers are also more open to teaching on generosity and to appeals to give. Following the findings from last year around committed Christians giving the most by value and proportion in that younger category, we decided to take a look in more detail. at this group. And you can see from the table the impact that hearing a sermon or church talk on generosity has is far higher among the younger age groups. Younger Christians also show greater appetite for regular teaching on generosity, with 47% of 18 to 24-year-olds and 46% of 25 to 34-year-olds saying they'd like it at least monthly. Younger givers are also more open to teaching on generosity and appeals to give in a variety of other ways. And again, one of our respondents, Dev, described hearing a sermon talking about always being a cheerful giver. And I think that's what affected me. The call to be a cheerful giver was what affected Dev, because I felt like I had stored too much value on the money or my future. And Dev hadn't even heard what Lucy shared this morning, so how about that? But we also found younger Christians talk more about their giving. So given that this younger cohort already has an appetite for generosity, it's perhaps not surprising that they do talk more. 56% of 25 to 34-year-olds have discussed giving at least once in the past few years with someone in church leadership or a mentor. By contrast, only 11% of those aged 65 and above have done the same. And we've also found younger Christians more likely to discuss giving with their peers. By age 25, however, the most common response to the question, how often do you discuss giving or causes you support with your Christian friends, becomes never. Around a quarter of 18 to 24-year-olds speak with friends about their giving every few months, compared with 12% of 35 to 44-year-olds. And that, we felt, is a challenge to us all and something worth exploring in more detail. What is it that stifles these conversations as we get older? And how might we normalize regular discussions about giving and generosity with our churches, in our small groups, amongst family and friends? Another shout out to our friends at Bible Society. To quote the press coverage that came last year, younger Christians want a full fat faith. And that seems in our report this year to very much include an appetite for intentional, gratitude-driven and joy-filled generosity, as Xing shared as she talked about her experiences. Living with my friends and having those conversations about those things made me think more intentionally about my giving and what it means to be generous with what I have and to care for people and to love people well and to serve others. Yeah, I guess part of that has also shaped my thoughts towards giving and about being generous and about loving others. So there are our key findings for this year. You have the reports. Please feel free to peruse them at your leisure. Just to conclude, reflecting on this, our third year, we are again heartened to see more and more evidence of the signs of really distinctive giving behaviors and attitudes to generosity, which sets Christians apart from the wider population. The research, we believe, continues to be clear that the more engaged Christians become with their faith, the more their generosity grows, and the richer and more committed their giving becomes. We see the seeds of seeds being sown across all generations, and an appetite from Christians to really wrestle with matters of financial stewardship and giving in church teaching, discussions with leaders. And we think that and church leaders should take particular encouragement from the openness and enthusiasm of younger Christians on this topic. So as I come to a close, again, can I celebrate and commend this report to you all. We believe there is a lot to be encouraged by within these pages, as well as important learnings that will spur us on to encourage greater generosity. Please do grab your printed copy, make sure you take those away with you, or feel free to use the QR code. All of the pages are now live on the website. Please feel free to share this link within your networks with anyone who you think will be inspired, provoked, encouraged by what the report says. We do believe we can close the giving gap in the UK as a united body of Christ, working together to build a thriving kingdom economy where all Christians wisely and generously steward their resources in pursuit of God's purposes here on earth. Thank you.